a thing called Who Gives a Crap, which is a company that makes toilet paper for places that don't have even toilets around the world. And it's a nonprofit young people's thing. And so I had ordered a carton, which must be, I can't even tell you how many rolls. So I feel totally prepared.
So we're live, guys. Just so
All
you know.
right. Thanks, Jamel. So I think this might be everyone.
Yeah, it looks like it. Hi.
Hey, Pete, where are you?
I'm sitting at the Rapid River right now doing a report.
All right. So Pete, do you want to get us going?
Sure. So thanks for setting this up, guys, Jamie and Jamel. Really appreciate it. In this day and age, this is kind of a strange thing to do, but I guess this is what we have to do. So I appreciate everybody hanging in there and I hope everybody's healthy. So yeah, let's bring the meeting to order. I think we might want to do some introductions because we have so many people on tonight. So let's just do that real quick and go around and do introductions. Hi, everybody. I'm Pete Slavinsky. I'm the current chair.
And this can get a little crazy because we don't, not everyone's in the same order. So maybe, do you want me to just call on people as we go? So I'm Jamie Fitch, the Sustainability
Let's do that.
Director for the town of Scarborough. And I'm just going to go straight down the order of the list of attendees and that I have in front of me. So it'll be a few staff people first. So we'll start with Jamel.
Hey guys, I'm Jamel. I'm the assistant town planner. Good to see you all.
And Angela.
Angela Blanchett, town engineer.
Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachel Hendrickson. I'm a Conservation Commission and the Planning Board.
Susan.
Hi, Susan Nixon, Conservation Commission.
Ben.
Hi, Ben Keller, Conservation Commission.
And Chuck.
Chuck Spanger, West Scarborough Conservation Commission.
Mike Shaw.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Mike Shaw. I'm the Public Works Director.
Rick Meinking.
Good evening, Rick Meinking, Planning Board member and Scarborough Energy or Sustainability Committee member.
Roger Beely.
Roger Bailey, Planning Board, Transportation Committee.
John Clucci.
Hi, everybody. John Clucci from the Town Council.
Robin Saunders.
Oh, you're muted.
Sorry.
Nope, try again. There you go.
Planning board member and also a long ranger. And I just want to say hi, Mike and Stephen. It's good to see your faces.
And speaking of Stephen, you're next.
Good evening, Steve Buckley, Deputy Director, Public Works.
And Jay.
Jay Chase, Planning Director.
Oh my God, Jay. Hi, Jay.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks, Jay.
Did I miss anyone?
I don't think so.
All right.
I have to say, this is the most attended Conservation Commission meeting I think we've had. So maybe we
really long time.
More of these in a really long time. All right, great. Thanks, Jamie, and thanks everyone for being here. Very quick, members, we need to vote on the 210 minutes. So if anybody had any comments or discussion for the minutes, otherwise I definitely take a request to accept those minutes.
So moved.
All in favor? All right.
So Pete, I'm just going to chime in that the state statute enabling virtual meetings actually requires a roll call vote. I'm sorry I know Conservation Commission isn't used to being quite so persnickety as others, but if we're going to take a vote, then probably needs to be done in that way as well, which would be simply calling out everyone's name and having them say yay or nay.
Thank you, Jay, for teaching us the way of how to do this correctly online.
Thank goodness you're here, Jay.
Yeah.
So we wouldn't want those minutes to be, just hanging out there.
This is true.
Could come back to bite us someday.
This is true. So, all right, let's do roll call. Is it appropriate for me to do the roll call, Jay, or should staff do the roll call so that I can actually vote as well?
Let it rip, Pete.
All right, I'm going to say approve the minutes. Rachel?
Yay, aye.
Okay. Susan?
Aye.
Ben?
Aye.
Chuck?
Aye.
Let's see here. Am I missing anybody else that's on the commission currently?
You.
Oh, yeah, aye. All right, I think we have that'll pass, I think. So I guess we need to do the same thing with approving tonight's agenda to have everything on record. So it's a very short agenda for us. We usually end up going pretty long, but tonight's pretty short. So I have a motion to approve the agenda. Any
Second.
seconds on that? All right, so let's do a vote on that. We'll start with Chuck.
Aye.
Rachel.
Aye.
Ben.
Aye.
Susan.
Aye.
Pete. Aye. All right. So great. So the real business tonight is really the stormwater program and some information on Phillips Brook. And then if we have to go over any old business, we can talk about some of the updates Jamie sent in relation to the high water marks. And I forget what else was on your previous email, Jamie, but if we need to get there, we will. So with that, let's pass off new business to Angela and Jamie, and I'll mute myself.
Great. I'm gonna jump in then. And first off, thank you guys for allowing us to use your meeting as the platform for this. This is something that I annually do with either council or planning board, and it's good to actually tap in another audience with the Conservation Commission. So, and I appreciate too some of the planning board members being here tonight. I know we're all in a world where we're probably staring at our screens way too much. So I really appreciate you volunteering to join us tonight to kind of walk through some of our stormwater program and talk specifically about our federal and state permit. I'm going to walk through first, and then I'm going to hand it over to Jamie, and she's going to talk about all the work that we're doing in Phillips Brook watershed. So I also was hoping, though, I know it's a little odd being online in this manner, but I'm hoping it could be somewhat interactive, and that if you have questions as I go through, I'd prefer you jump in and ask your questions rather than waiting to the end. And we've been kind of doing this through planning board, and that's where Jamel is kind of orchestrating things from behind the scene. And I believe there's a button you can push to raise your hand. And I'm going to have Jamel kind of watching over that to see if he needs to interrupt me, or I'm going to try to pause throughout the presentation so that we can try to get everybody's questions in as we go.
Can I interrupt for one second, Angela?
Yeah.
Jamel, can you show us where the raise hand thing is? I don't see it on my screen.
Sure. So if you go to, if you click on yourself on the title, nope, it's not there. You guys know where it is? I don't know where it is.
Jamel, it's under participants. So if Pete, you go down to the bottom of the screen, you hover over the bottom middle of the screen and it'll say participants, and you click on it, and then you find yourself and raise your hand down at the bottom, or actually you can just click raise your hand.
Oh, participants up on the top. Yeah.
And this might be a little bit creepy too, but some of us can still see you, even though you might not be able to see us. So if you want to just wave your hands, we'll notice that too, if you can't find the raise hand button. Big Brother is watching.
Yeah, I don't see it, but for some reason I don't have it. I have a mute and more, but that's okay. Let's just continue, and we'll roll with it.
Yeah, and you guys, you can just jump in, or like I said, like wave your hand at the camera, because some of us are working with multiple screens, so we can still see you.
It looks like Robin has raised her hand.
She did. Yes. And then we're gonna lower it. There. But I cannot see all of you guys because I'm looking at the presentation. So that's why I'm gonna rely on Jamel to do that. And be my
Yeah, and I
eyes. So-
can't actually raise my hand here. So if you can't do that, just raise your hand on the screen and I'll try and find you.
Okay, so I'm gonna try to go through this fairly quickly, just to really touch on some highlights. So I'm gonna go to the next slide, Jamel, and get started. And talk about what this permit is. We are talking tonight about our stormwater permit, town of Scarborough. We have a federal and state permit, which really starts with the Clean Water Act of 1972. So this was the first time with the Clean Water Act that the federal government really started regulating discharges of stormwater into our waterways, our lakes, rivers, streams, and our marsh. So under that, the regulated municipalities have to have a permit associated with that. And I'll get to what regulated really means in terms of this permit in a little bit, but wanted to address that this is really all discharges of stormwater into any of the water bodies within our urbanized area. Next slide. So I've tried to refrain from saying MS4 a lot, but I really can't. So I'm going to explain what it is. Because when we talk about our stormwater permit, I talk about our MS4 permit, and really that stands for our municipal separate storm sewer system. And essentially, that's just a long way to say two separate systems. We have a sewer system and we have a stormwater system. And it's really about making progress to make sure that those two systems are as separate as they possibly can be. And in Scarborough, we're fortunate enough because in relative terms, our sewer system in town is fairly new. When you look at some of the older mill towns or even throughout New England, some of the older communities where I'm sure you're aware that the sewer and storm drain were all combined, or people had their sewers that discharged directly to streams or directly into stormwater systems and pipes, and they all were connected together. And so with the Clean Water Act, a lot of work and a lot of effort and a lot of money went into the sewer system, went into pump stations, went into wastewater treatment plants, and really everything was collected and went in for treatment. However, every time a large rain event happens, those facilities like the pump stations and the wastewater treatment plants were inundated and couldn't keep up. And so then you have overflow systems, which again, in Scarborough, we're fortunate we do not, but you'll hear about those, say in Portland or South Portland or Saco. Our neighboring communities do have those and have to work towards that. We're fortunate where we are just making sure that we eliminate any of these cross connections, or when new systems are set up, they're very separated. So you'll hear me talk about our MS4 permit, which is this stormwater program. Next slide, Jamel. So back to what a regulated municipality means. There are 30 in the state of Maine, and essentially it is within the urbanized areas. It's really where the development is, where because of the density, it is putting a strain on some of our water bodies. And so those are really focused on the greater Portland area, the communities within the greater Bangor area, Lewiston, Auburn, and then down at York and Kittery area. So those are the 30, and we do work together on many elements associated with our permit. While we each individually have our own permit, Scarborough has our own MS4 permit, there's a lot of similarities between each permit from each municipality. So there are a lot of opportunities for us to work together. What it does mean though is that in these regulated communities such as Scarborough, the cost of development is going to be higher than say in a non-regulated community, just because there are a lot more stipulations and effort that goes into how we document things and how we track things and how we show progress about improving things. This is the MS4 permit we do on a 5-year cycle. We are actually working on an extended permit at this point. Our permit ended in 2018 and we continue to work under that permit. However, we've been negotiating with DEP and getting feedback from EPA. And so our next permit will actually start in July of 2021. And I'll get into it at the end about some highlights on what that means for the new permit. Next slide. So part of the permit is 6 distinct measures that we need to look at, and we call them our minimum control measures. They are divided into 6 categories, but they include a lot of different things under each of the categories. Because of the time this evening, I'm going to focus on really 2 and touch on the 3rd. But really looking at probably this audience, and I'm going to focus on our construction oversight, that runoff control, as well as our post-construction stormwater management program. And then also probably touch base on our illicit discharge detection and elimination. Other than that, we do spend time, money, and effort on education and outreach and our public participation, which, like I said, we do really in a collaborative effort with a lot of the communities, so we can pool our money and resources and get maybe a bigger bang for the buck. And what you're seeing there is pictures of Jamie's cute son and my daughter and my niece at the Urban Runoff, which is a 5K that all of the municipalities in the greater Portland area, which were 14 of us, that all volunteer and put in a lot of time and effort to make that a successful 5K race, that we raise money, and that money then goes back into stormwater education in our school systems. So we have people that come into Scarborough schools and teach about the water cycle and stormwater management. The other thing, one I'm just going to breeze over it too, is our good housekeeping and pollution and prevention measure, which probably is Stephen's biggest task on one of these, this and the illicit discharge detection. But good housekeeping is really about our facilities, which Public Works is obviously a very active and does a lot of operations in town. And so it's really about keeping everything contained so that no pollutants are discharged from our facilities that might impact our natural resources. And there's a lot of work that goes behind that, and training of our staff and crew, and documenting things, and coming up with plans and procedures. So that falls, I think, heavily on our Public Works department. And so I just, those are the 6, and I'll get into the 3 we'll focus on next.
Angela, I think Pete had a question.
Okay.
Yeah, Angela, just a quick question. I see the 6 goals are really good. I'm wondering how, or if there are any programs in there that raise funds at the municipal level or at the 30 community MS4 level for dealing with discharges that don't meet MS4 standards. So I'm thinking, for instance, about the discharge that's at Amore on the Marsh, Cobblestone Grill. And are there any programs like that in place that are competitive or anything like that, that are region-wide that can be applied for, or that are actually raised by the municipality to deal with things like that?
We don't have a plan specifically in place for those, although we did try to investigate through some other state agencies to look at maybe some grant opportunities and some match associated with that one you're specifically talking about. And I guess that's where Jamie comes in, is does a lot of work of just looking for opportunities. But we don't have anything specifically under this program. And I will say, if something gets folded into this permit, our MS4 permit, then we are not eligible for a lot of grant funds for the federal level because it's required instead of something we're doing above and beyond. So we need to kind of also be careful about how we write things so that we don't prohibit us from getting future funding through some of these grant opportunities. And I don't know if Jamie wants to chime in with anything else on that, or.
No, I think you covered it with that. It's a fun unfunded mandate.
Yeah.
That's said a lot. So it's up to the local municipality to fund all of this program.
Okay. Next slide. So this is my one slide just to briefly talk about illicit discharge detection and elimination. And as I said before, any of these 6, we could talk, there's a lot of work that goes on behind it. And this is probably one of the bigger ones too that we deal with. And this is really just finding any of these cross connections or illicit discharges and trying to figure out where they're coming from and eliminating them. And so we work with, I will say, across all departments with this, but I think, again, this falls heavily on Stephen Buckley, our Deputy Director of Public Works, really deals with this probably the most and is the conduit that everyone goes to with this. We have a lot of public works crews, obviously, all around town that are in the ditches or at some of these outfalls when they're doing some of their operations and maintenance. And so they can find these things. We also have our police and fire department personnel who are also trained and are aware of what this means. So when they see an oil spill or the gas spill like that on the pavement, they're able to do spill kits and be able to clean that up, and also, again, contact Stephen so that we can document all of this, and we report to DEP annually on those. So it's really all eyes out and about around Scarborough and finding these things. Code enforcement is obviously another big part of it, where they see things as they're out and about as well, and can help with us coming up with a remedy and our plan to move forward too, with any notice of violations or anything like that that needs to come through. And along with our town departments, I will say, I'll just put in also that our neighboring communities, we also work together with. So we'll get noticed from South Portland or Saco or Westbrook or Gorham when there's any spills in the area or near our shared watersheds, I will say. And so, and the same happens for Scarborough as we find things and go the other way. And I guess I can give Stephen an opportunity if you'd like to chime in with anything with this before I move on. I don't mean to put you on the spot though.
Yeah, no, I think you did a pretty good job. I'll just kind of give a brief overview of what my task involves. So I do outfall inspections, all of our outfalls. So the picture on the right of the screen is a picture of one of our outfalls. That's well, it's got some soap suds, so that's illicit discharge, probably from a cross connection with a dishwasher or something along those lines. So I inspect around 230 outfalls over a 5-year period. Those are all the outfalls that we have within our urbanized area, which I'm sure Angela will go into in a little bit. But that's the outfall inspections is one of the main focuses that I do. And then we also have several others, which include mapping. So we map all our stormwater infrastructure, so all of our pipes, all of our ditches, all of our retention ponds. We all have that mapped, and that's done through the GIS. So it's all available online. And whenever we add new infrastructure, that's all updated. And then we also work with the sewer department, and as Angela says, other municipalities, and the Turnpike and DOT, work with them to identify any other sources of illicit discharge.
Thanks.
Yep.
Do you want to move on to the next slide, Jamil? So one of the ones that I'm gonna dig deeper into is the two that I'd say planning and code deal with the most, and that's MCM 4, our minimum control measure 4. We deal with construction site and the runoff controls, and just ensuring that any of the both public and private properties don't impact the water resources. Next slide, Jamel. So here's a list of active, what I'm calling active construction sites in town that we're monitoring under our MS4 permit. These are sites that we have inspectors out on a weekly basis, just checking as we said, really the erosion and sediment controls on the site, and they're reporting back to staff. When things become problematic is when I usually go out to the site and talk with the contractor and kind of try to come up with remedies. There is a lot going on in town. It's very busy, as you can see, and I guess this is my opportunity to give a plug out to the planning board members on the call, because they had a very busy week last week. Getting through the agendas as much as possible, but doing 2 Zoom meetings and a total of more than 8 hours on Zoom, trying to get through the planning board agenda. So really appreciate kind of keeping those moving forward. And but with that comes a lot of work on the other end as far as our construction oversight, and that's all regulated through this MS4 permit. And we report annually back to DEP on these projects, and giving them a summary of not only what's going on out there, but any non-compliance issues and how they were addressed and how quickly they were addressed, and trying to keep everything in compliance within the town boundaries. Next slide, Jamil. So here's a couple examples of things that I guess I would say I look for. These are both Scarborough sites where the site is unstable and soil and sediment starts moving around. And this really happens as you denude sites, and there's an opportunity with every rain event for that material to move off site and end up heading downstream. And ultimately downstream meaning into our streams, our rivers, and our marsh. Next slide. And this is ultimately what we try to avoid, but this does happen occasionally. And again, that's when I usually hit the site. When those measures for the perimeter erosion and sediment control are breached, that sediment can move very quickly into our streams and rivers. And so it's really crucial just to stay on top of that. And that's where I think our program in our inspection frequency at that once a week is higher than maybe some municipalities, or it's at par with some of the others in our area. It's just keeping a handle on that and making sure that we are in compliance with our permit, because these kind of items really means the town of Scarborough is non-compliant. And trying to keep us out of trouble means we're trying to keep our contractors out of trouble. And so that's really the goal as we kind of move through some of these construction sites.
Hey, Angela.
Yeah.
Quick side question. How does the MS4 permit program link up with urban impaired streams and the requirements for that? And then second to that is the goal of this to maintain the discharges as they are, for instance, and not make them worse, or is the goal to actually improve conditions, or is that more the goals for the urban impaired stream stuff?
I think overall our goal of the MS4 permit is to protect and improve the stream water quality pieces.
Okay.
And as you mentioned, our urban impaired streams, which we have actually 3, in Red Brook and Phillips Brook and a piece of Long Creek watershed, that in our permit is written in a way that does touch and it does link into those, and it really puts it as we have to provide DEP with what our priority watersheds are, which essentially means our urban impaired streams. So our priorities are right now Phillips Brook and Red Brook, because those are our urban impaired streams. Long Creek obviously is a different story because we have a whole different district that covers with that. But really we link that to the MS4 permit in that way, that we prioritize it. So like when we do catch basin cleaning or sweeping of the streets, we put a priority on those watersheds, and we may do those early and we may do those often, type of thing.
Thank you.
Yeah. Let's see, where was I? So I guess next slide. So this is some measures of what do we do in order to stay in compliance and keep the sediment on the sites. And it's really about a method of filtering those sediments in the runoff so they don't leave the site. And these are examples of our better management practices, or we call BMPs, that are used. And these are both, again, Scarborough sites. And on the left, you can see really upstream, there's hay bales and silt fence and stone check dams and erosion, mulch berms. So a lot of layers that water you can see, which looks like chocolate milk above it, that needs to filter through. So the goal obviously is on the downstream side that you will see clear water flowing out of the downstream side. So there's a lot of measures that can go into place. And so it's a matter of making sure we're on the site too, to say, okay, this isn't working, you need to do more. And maybe it means just another layer or another treatment method, or even the location that they're discharging at. So there's a lot of things we can do about that. The one on the right is showing as development occurs, it's also looking at internally. That dark mulch in behind the curbing is a stormwater water quality treatment system. It's a focal point system. And so the water actually is meant to run into those and filter before it discharges off the site when this project's all done. However, during construction, with a lot of sediment moving around, it's really crucial to not clog those. So it's really about protecting those when they're actually going in as well, because obviously we don't want to prematurely clog those. We want those to be up and running and operational and last as long as we possibly can before maintenance is due. Next slide. So here's a picture at the Downs, right in the middle of Scarborough. This is something I just wanted to point out because for the planning board members that are in attendance, one of the things we talk about during planning board is in this site particularly, the planning board was concerned about the proximity to the wetland and natural resources surrounding this development. And so we talk a lot during those meetings about additional erosion and sediment controls to be put in place. And I think if you can see on your screens on the bottom of this, bottom right, you can see there is that's the double layer right there. It's pretty clearly shown. And I think that is part of those conversations. And really for a developer, yes, I guess it is a little bit, it's more time and money, but it's really doing its job in those locations that you not only in this case, you'd have 2 layers of filtration, but you also have 2 layers of protection as far as construction happens around these, as we have rain events, there's constantly repair that needs to happen to those. So you're going to see silt fence that falls down, or a berm that gets run over by a tire or something that it loses its integrity. So having those double protections and really the sensitive areas, I think is something that the planning board has been pushing of late. And I think that's showing its weight in gold at this point, as when you see these out in the site and you see how they are functioning. So I just want to kind of encourage that work to continue, because I don't think it's a lot of extra money and effort on maybe the developer's part, but I think it goes a long way in protecting the environment around these sites. Next slide. This is another picture, you know, showing in the center, you can see the dark brown surrounded by that tan is water quality treatment facilities. Again, you can see how these go in the middle of a construction site, and it's really about making sure that we do protect those and making sure those don't get clogged during construction, because that can happen very easily. And all of these, we do, again, summarize these sites and report back to DEP on that annual basis. Next slide. So that was it for during construction. I don't know if you want to go back to Mel, if there's any questions on what we do during construction of our sites in town or not.
I just want to mention that through the MS4 permit, we are required to do 1 or 2 inspections through the lifetime of this project. But as Angela mentioned, for all of our projects, we're inspecting on a weekly basis, and that's to make sure that the development that's happening during construction isn't impacting our water resources negatively. So it's looking at all of the erosion control practices that are on site, make sure they're in working order, that maintenance isn't necessary, as well as to make sure, you know, the plans are going in according to the spec that was approved by the planning board. But I just wanted to mention that that's one way that Scarborough is ensuring the protection of our natural resources by having eyes on these projects on a regular basis.
Yeah, and what I tell people too is that really, as I said before, when the contractor is not in compliance, it really is saying that the town of Scarborough is not in compliance, and we open ourselves up to fines by DEP and EPA, and we have had EPA audits in town as well as DEP hitting different sites. And so it starts with us because we are a regulated community. We have that oversight. They put that on us as a local municipality to have that first oversight and enforcement. So we just want to make sure that we're not setting ourselves up for failure in that case. And so having eyes on the sites as much as possible is very important. So I can move on to my final piece of minimum control measure I'm going to talk about tonight, which is after construction. We have different requirements under this, one being what we would consider low impact development. So essentially, we need to encourage developers to treat the stormwater at the site. So not necessarily collecting it all and sending it far away to do treatment in one place. It's really looking at how can you do these small treatment systems and really follow the natural terrain or hydrology of the site and mimic that as much as possible, rather than really disrupting how watersheds flow or how their boundaries are set. So in this case, there's a picture here. This is a tree filter that's at the actual it's at our intersection of Cummings Road and Payne Road. That takes on the stormwater from the roadway and does some treatment that is in our Red Brook watershed. And then other things shown here is porous pavement, which you can see the line where it looks dry. They did porous pavement in those parking stalls and really looking at how that water just infiltrates through rather than sitting at the surface and causing freezing or other things, so that you really the goal about using less sand, or using no sand but less salt on the sites as well. And the bottom one, bottom right, is a focal point system, really again at gutter line to treat roadway runoff. So these are a few of the systems that are, you can see that are in place and constructed, that some examples of those. Next slide.
Hey, Angela, real quick on this one.
Yeah.
Another question. It says encourage developers to use techniques. Do we have an idea as to whether or not there's a good track record in terms of the efficacy of the green infrastructure or whatever that's being encouraged to be used? Like, do we have a concept of how many developers are actually using those techniques versus just standardized water collection techniques?
I don't have a number. It would be anecdotal at best. But I will say, as more of these go in, I would say we see more and more of them, just because, for one thing, limited space. People don't have the room to do an acre pond in most cases. I know we're about to get some of those, so don't hold me to that. But really, that land is really gobbled up, those larger pieces in most cases. So people do have to get creative. And the more that these are going in, the more people are seeing them as an alternative and a way to get really more development on their land and still treating the stormwater. So I think as successes come, I think you'll end up seeing more of those, or just necessitated because of the lack of room. They don't really have a choice. They need to get creative.
Yeah, I was just kind of wondering if that's something that we have to track as part of the MS4 permit.
We don't yet. It's written so that we have to encourage, and I know the planning department does meet with most developers ahead of submission to planning board, and that's where that conversation starts. And really, it's helped that the planning board is also aware of this, our ordinance and the requirement to encourage that. And so I think they do a pretty good job, as well as when staff makes comments about opportunities, that the planning board is really supportive of that and trying to encourage really, as I said, some of the LID practices. It doesn't necessarily need to be a structural practice, BMP practice. It can be reducing of impervious area. Planning board is usually pretty big on that. When we started talking about, do you need this much parking? Does the drive aisles don't necessarily need to be that wide? Things like that. And so a lot of those are still, I'd consider low impact methods. And so we do encourage that with our staff comments. And I think planning board has been very good about also encouraging and recommending that through the process, which is helpful. I don't know if Jay wants to chime in with anything, that he probably has more.
I think Roger wants to chime in as well.
Oh, okay.
Yes, this is primarily for Angela, I guess. Could you speak about the porous pavements? Because we seem to be seeing, that coming up more and more at the planning board. And as I recall the Acura dealership did not want to do it. And the apartment complex down at the Downs wanted to do it. And it seems to me we're in a way, leaving it up to the developer what they want to do, and I'm not sure, you know, there seems to be a pro and a con on both of that, and I'm just wondering.
Yeah, the examples you bring up are, I will say, two very different sites as far as groundwater and soil types. And so we try to at least leave it open to giving people options, just because there's some stormwater facilities that just don't work on certain types of sites. And I think that's where you get into looking at the pros and cons of each system. And like you were talking about, say, with the Acura dealership, and really looking at what they had for room for groundwater. It's maybe not the best direction porous pavement, but there are other LID measures they could use. You know what I mean? So it's really, doesn't mean it's like all or nothing. We don't want to push all porous pavement everywhere because it doesn't make sense everywhere. And so you're talking about the apartment buildings at the Downs, same thing. When you talk about porous pavement, you're talking about no sand, but salt. And we do have some watersheds that have issues with high chlorides. So it's really a balancing act and looking at each site individually to see what measure makes sense for each site. And I think we have a very big toolbox, though, is the good thing, right? So we don't have to do a cookie cutter, everyone gets porous pavement or everyone gets a detention pond, or it's really looking at the quality and the characteristics of each site and trying to match what makes most sense.
I think it might be helpful for us then, say a developer is proposed to do it, say like those apartments at the Downs, and staff doesn't feel it's an appropriate location for that type of pavement. Maybe you've made a recommendation and I've just missed it, but I would suggest that, you know, in the staff comments saying that staff does not agree with porous pavements at this location due to soils or something like that. Because what we're hearing is, oh, we don't like sand goes through it or salt or whatever it is, you know. I forget what the argument was at the Acura dealership, but yeah. I seem to recall the suggestion was that they might want to try it or consider it, but they didn't want to, you know, for whatever reason.
And I guess the other thing, Roger, is there are, like I said, there's other options. And so I would say, like, if a developer really balks at a certain measure like that, then we don't necessarily want to push it because they don't have that ownership or in it to say this is going to work and we're going to make it work. If they don't buy in at the beginning, I mean, we also want this to be effective, right? And so we want them to believe in the system and say, this is going to work for us and we're going to make it happen and we're going to maintain this and we're going to have, you know, a good site where we have clean water coming off it. You know what I mean? The last thing we want to do is force someone into a system that they don't want to have in the first place, and it necessarily isn't maintained correctly or as frequently, or ends up being ripped out and replaced. You know what I'm saying? So there's a balancing act. Okay. Let's see. Do you want to move on to the next slide? So for our post-construction, we have a post-construction ordinance. When a project goes through the planning board, it gets developed, gets constructed, is all said and done, and the contractors walk away, that is not the end of our stormwater BMPs, our stormwater treatment facilities. What probably used to happen, we have a lot of subdivisions probably in the 80s and 90s in town. A lot of those probably did get forgotten. And I know Public Works has done a lot of work really going back in and mucking out a lot of detention ponds over the past years that were forgotten. And DEP knows that. And so part of this permit, the MS4 permit, is saying municipalities, you need to do something about that so these aren't forgotten. So we do have an ordinance now in place that is part of the planning board approval that says annually these sites need to report to the town of Scarborough. They report to the planning and code office what their maintenance was for their stormwater facilities, what they did for maintenance, that everything's working efficiently, or any repairs that they had to do to their facilities to ensure that they're working. So this is, I think, a huge step in making progress to keep these systems functioning and not just you construct it and you walk away, because none of these systems, even a detention pond, everything needs some maintenance associated with it over time. And so this is actually a recorded document that says that they will be reporting to us annually. And then what happens is we take those inspection reports and summarize those and provide an update in our annual report every year to DEP, showing which sites are reporting, which ones aren't reporting, and what they're reporting, if these systems are actually functioning or not.
Is that in perpetuity, or is there a sunset date on, or a sunset time frame that reporting has to occur?
You mean annually every year? There's no, yeah. Unless they want to replace it with another system, yes. Or come through with a redevelopment, those type of things. But yes, that is my understanding.
Wow.
Is that retroactive?
No, it is not. So we have some older sites in town that seem as though that would fit into this category that do not report annually.
Okay.
Angela, can you speak to the DEP? Often though, we'll have 5-year recertification for older systems. Can you maybe speak to that for those that we aren't capturing?
Yeah, in the 90s, DEP also recognized what was happening. And so they started a, for any site law permits. So those are the larger permits that are like 3 acres of impervious area. Those larger sites, they require every 5 years that those sites report to the state. Those don't go through the local municipalities. Those go right to DEP. And DEP has a list of sites that they do sporadically will pick and choose, so you don't know which ones come up in those 5-year research to visit the site. I will say Scarborough had a visit with our Wentworth school. Maybe it was last year. I got a call from DEP. They came out, we did a walkthrough. That was under the site law permit and a 5-year research, which we did great. Roger?
Yeah, Angela, when the town goes in, Public Works goes in and cleans up one of these ponds, does it automatically fall into the annual evaluation, or does it just stay in its grandfather position?
No, so when I said Public Works goes in, it's those older ponds that we actually own. There is some ponds that we own that aren't part of homeowners associations, or maybe it was before we started requiring documentation about who maintained them. So without really having that, it falls kind of, well, everything falls on Mike Shaw. I'll say Public Works steps in. And so that's where they were. And so once that gets cleaned out, which has been over the past few years, they've done a lot of ponds. Really, it's easier to maintain from that point moving forward. You know what I mean? And so those are just on our town owned.
I have one more question real quick. I don't want to take up too much time, but what's the repercussions if a report is not submitted, or if the report shows that it's not properly being maintained or operated?
So I do get reports in that show maintenance is needed, and it's usually about the timing because our reports are due in on June 1st every year. And so I usually get everything on June 1st every year. So I get saying, yeah, we went to the site yesterday and we see maintenance is needed. And so we do have, I think the date was specifically probably picked because it gives everybody time. Our reporting goes through the July 1. So it gives a month really for us to have an interaction, say, when are you going to address that? And usually they can address it within the month. And so by the July 1st date, I actually get a new clean inspection report, which is helpful. We do have occasionally some sites that do not submit, which we then have to follow up with, and it takes more staff time to do a little, I'll say a lot of hand holding with some sites to try to get that inspection. And we do have some problematic sites with that I have had to go out and do my own inspections, which I don't really want to get in the practice of doing because we don't have the time to do that. But DEP is asking us at this point to start considering fines associated with that, I will say.
And would you or staff be able to comment on whether or not there's existing capacity within the town to continue to do this for as long as we need to?
For what piece?
I mean, you said, you had to go out and personally inspect a couple on your own. I mean, do we think that there's going to reach a level where there's just too much and there's not going to be enough capacity at the town to actually support the program? Or, you know what I mean? Like, is there existing staff capacity and time to be able to continue to take all these reports, pull them together to EPA and DEP and be able to really keep track of how well we're doing?
I will say with the amount of development happening in Scarborough, that number grows substantially every year on the number, not only that we're looking at during construction, but also post-construction. So it's really about getting ahead of that and getting organized and keeping, I guess I don't have a good answer for you for that. At this point, it's really about compliance. And if everyone complies, it's obviously easy. But if I have a lot of sites that aren't, then no, we don't have the capacity to really do the enforcement associated with that. And the problem is, and I'll get into actually with the next slide, we talk about our new permit coming up. If you want to go to the next slide, Jamel. We're talking about the new permit, which means new requirements. And so there is going to be a greater push for more time, effort, and money associated with this program in order to be in compliance. And the town of Scarborough has been audited by EPA. And while we were not fined during that audit, we are most likely high on the list for the next round. At this point, DEP has gone through all municipalities, the 30 municipalities that are regulated communities. And so we're due to have another visit. And they have said that with every permit now, we will be getting audited. And so trying to keep up with that, it will be prioritizing and how we prioritize staff's time. So yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. So with the new,
Angela, if I could real quick, I think Pete, part of the answer, I think, is something Jamie mentioned earlier. It's about the unfunded mandates. So yes, I think Angela she and Jamie, Jamel, Mike, Steve, all do a really good job of coordinating, collaborating on pulling these things together. But it's always increasing, as Angela said. So right now we're staying on top of it, and it's just something that we monitor annually and try to do our best to stay on top of. But it's what we have to do to stay out of more hot water. So
Yeah, it just might mean that we have to shift some of our priorities. And if this becomes larger, then our priorities might have to shift away from other things that we are doing. So it could be a matter of that. So with the new permit, I just highlighted a few bullets here and talking about our greater public process, which again is more really staff time and effort through that. Increased outreach and some behavior campaigns. Those are things that we actually is part of what I talked about is pooling our kind of resources with the greater Portland and actually all of the state community that are regulated. We start doing some of those behavior change campaigns together as a group. So that is actually getting increased in our number of campaigns and different programs that we have to do associated with that. As Stephen had touched on our outfall inspections right now, he had talked about, I think he said 230 outfalls. It's really about increasing that as far as the monitoring and sampling, as far as doing those during, say, wet weathers when we see issues. I know the whole point of doing outfall inspections is you go out there and you're going to see a dry pipe is the goal. We don't have dry pipes in Scarborough. So it's really about figuring out what is groundwater and what is maybe not groundwater. So that's a lot of effort and time that we're going to be trying to focus in on that. We also talked about really revamping a lot of our programs and our plans for how we deal with illicit discharges and just our daily operations. And as you had mentioned before, Pete, with the urban impaired streams, and that we have 3 of them, really this new permit is going to include more language and more specifics to what we need to do in those urban impaired streams. And we need to come up with actually plans and projects within those watersheds to show improvement specifically. And then just a greater oversight. When we talk about the construction sites, this new permit is going to be requiring a lot of ordinance changes, which specifically put enforcement on the local municipalities. So there'll be more, not only we're saying our time, but the code enforcement officers' times associated with those permits. Next. So this is my last slide. And this is, I think for all of us that have been dealing with renegotiating, I will say, our new permit for the MS4. This is a big one for us, which is really the overarching implications of some of the statewide permits. The state of Maine has come up with our impervious cover, what we call TMDL, but essentially meaning they set benchmarks for where these watersheds, our urban impaired watersheds, should be. So Red Brook, they are showing at 8% and Phillips Brook at 6%. We are obviously not hitting those. And this is 2 areas of town which are our growth areas. So there is a balancing act obviously associated with that, where we're looking at putting our development and saying we need to reduce our impervious cover. So there is ways to do that. It's about disconnecting, I call it, the impervious cover. It's really about some of the things we talked about earlier, is really how you treat the pavement and you before it gets discharged, and really disconnect it so you're not having impervious area with runoff sheeting right off into our streams and wetlands. And the other one being the bacteria statewide TMDL, which we are also subject to in the town of Scarborough. So this new permit really keys into those, and I think it will be a challenge for us to find creative ways in which to balance all these things.
So this picture is Ferry Beach, though.
It is.
Yeah.
Okay. That's photo credit to Jamie Fitch.
Great.
All right. And that's my MS4 spiel.
That was great. Thank you.
Thanks for listening.
And if there aren't any questions for Angela, I will go through a bit about our Phillips Brook project that I've mentioned a little bit in our past meetings. So Phillips Brook, on your screen right now, the area in green is the Phillips Brook watershed, or the area of land that drains into Phillips Brook. So you can see I-95 on the western part of the watershed. Broad Turn Road kind of cuts it in half. And it goes through Dunstan Corner. It actually enters the Scarborough Marsh, right near kind of Amore on the marsh. So that just is to kind of orient you with the watershed. So the town received funding to complete a management plan in 2018. We got funding from DEP and worked in conjunction with local partners and the Cumberland County Soil and Water Conservation District to put that together. It was actually, it started in 2016. We finalized it in 2018. And last year, 2019, we received more funding from DEP to begin implementing the plan. And so we'll walk you through a bit about what is entailed in the grant and where things stand currently. As you may imagine, things are being shifted a bit given our current state of pandemic that is causing a shift in our timeline. So we'll talk about that a bit as well. So Jamel, you can advance the slide. So the first thing I want to touch on is the education and outreach elements that are part of the grant. So we're kind of focusing on 3 areas that were identified in the watershed management plan. When the plan was put together, there were some surveys that were done throughout the watershed, and they noticed that some residents were dumping yard waste, grass clippings, fall leaves, and brush on stream banks, and that's not great for stream water quality. So we're doing a bit of outreach to our stream abutters, talking about proper yard waste management, and encouraging them to either compost it away from the stream or take it off site to be disposed of. And a mailing went out to all the stream abutters last fall, talking about their options for yard waste management. The other residential outreach component is focusing on lawn care. So we know that there is an issue with lawn chemicals like fertilizers and weed and bug killers getting into our waters. So we've partnered with Friends of Scarborough Marsh to help develop a marsh-friendly lawn care program. We're kind of piloting it in the Phillips Brook watershed in the Dunstan area. And it really focuses on using healthy lawn care practices to build up soil health and reduce the use of, or use proper fertilization, and then reduce the use of weed and bug killers. And so we did our first training with Friends of Scarborough Marsh in conjunction with them last fall, and had a number of residents attend. Pete was there. And so this is based largely on one of our MS4 requirements. One of the audiences that Angela kind of touched on, one of the requirements is to educate people about lawn care. So it's building on that and really trying to do a concerted effort in one area of town, and hopefully have some, see some behavior change and improvement there. And then the last element is looking at winter maintenance. So we talked a bit about the stormwater best management practices for dealing with stormwater on site. And Phillips Brook is one of the watersheds where DEP feels like infiltration or using porous pavement and things like that is probably not the best thing for our stream, because we do have high levels of salt or chloride in our stream. And by infiltrating runoff that has salt in it, it gets into our groundwater, and then it's really difficult to get out. And winter maintenance practices is one of those things that contributes a lot of salt to our streams. So we are planning to do a workshop for our Public Works winter ops crew, as well as the private contractors operating in the area, to review some best practices for winter maintenance. It's based on a program out of New Hampshire called the Green Snow Pro program, where Public Works crews and contractors are educated and trained on best management practices for winter maintenance that can actually allow them to decrease the amount of salt that they use when they're out maintaining roads and parking lots. And in New Hampshire, they actually get those contractors or public works crews who receive certification also receive limited liability coverage when they use their best practices for winter maintenance. So we're hoping to have a similar program established in Maine because it has been really well received in New Hampshire. They've been doing it for a number of years now. And so we're in the very early stages. Scarborough has a limited role in that, but it is kind of a regional effort with the municipalities in Greater Portland and the municipalities in Bangor, the Bangor area as well, looking at winter maintenance practices. All right, we'll go to the next slide. So the other big part of our grant is doing a stream and floodplain restoration project at a location on Phillips Brook. So this is kind of an overview of the site. It is the Public Works laydown yard, and actually we can go to the next slide, Jamel, and it'll zoom us in a little bit more. Right off of Payne Road. So this site used to be a DOT yard, and then for many years it was the town's public works site. And Mike, you can correct me if I'm wrong. And now it is just a storage area or a staging area for material. And you can see that blue line represents Phillips Brook. So it runs along the edge of the public works laydown yard. And the next photo we'll talk a bit, or the next slide we'll talk a bit about the current conditions at the site. So we're dealing with bank erosion and undercutting, and a lot of that is because the stream is no longer connected to its floodplain. So when we get high flows flowing through that area, the stream can't overflow its banks onto the floodplain, so it erodes down the channel, cuts down the channel, erodes out the stream banks, and we're left with a stream that looks like the photo on your screen there. And the site also is kind of overrun with invasive plants, as a lot of other sites in this watershed are as well, primarily knotweed and bittersweet. So there's a lot going on here that we're going to try to address. I think we can go to the next slide. Has the engineered plans for the site. So last spring, we contracted with Acorn Engineering to develop the site plan to restore the stream in this location. So if we go to the next slide, Jamel, I'm going to walk through kind of what this is all showing for those of us who may not be used to seeing what engineered design plans look like. And this is going to be a partnership to address this site. Public Works is going to do a portion of the work, and we will be hiring a private contractor to do a portion of it as well. So the first step to restoring the stream is to remove the invasive plants as much as possible, and grade back the stream bank to a more stable slope, and to help the stream reconnect with its floodplain. And I just want to note about the invasives at the site. We're not under any illusions that we're actually going to get rid of the invasives at the site. We basically have another year to work on this project, and it would be a multi-year effort to get rid of the invasives. So our goal here is to essentially get rid of them for long enough so that the native vegetation that we're going to plant in their place has a chance to take hold. But it would be a whole separate effort to actually eradicate the invasives from that site. So Public Works will be removing some of the material from the site, removing the invasives from the site, removing about a foot of material from the entire laydown yard areas to help remove some of the contaminated soils that would have invasive seeds and roots and whatnot in them, and dispose of them off site. And work on grading back those slopes, as I said. And then we'll have a private contractor come in to do the in-stream work and using some really innovative techniques to restore the stream channel, and we'll walk through those as well. Jamel, you want to go to the next slide? I'll talk about a bit about the structures, the natural structures that we're going to be putting into the stream. First up are root wads. You can kind of see them. It's hard to see on the plan, and really they just look like little stick trees that are on the edges of the stream bank. Jamel's pointing to some of them with his mouse. So those are root wads, which are essentially trees that are, for lack of a better term, ripped out of the ground with their root balls intact. The ends are sharpened kind of like a pencil, and they're driven into the stream banks to help stabilize the eroding banks, but then they also provide habitat for fish species, but more importantly for our purposes are the little critters or bugs called macroinvertebrates. Those are what DEP looks for when they're testing streams to see how clean streams are. And there are certain critters that that are intolerant of pollution. So if those animals are present in our streams, we can assume that our stream is healthy. And it's through our restoration efforts, it's our goal to return those important macroinvertebrates to the streams. So these root wads will help stabilize the stream, but also provide important habitat for those types of animals. So we'll go to the, yeah.
If I could just, you referenced how they use trees that are taken out of the ground and used for this. I remember when we visited, I believe it was Long Creek, and they were sort of talking about that they actually got the trees from what was otherwise going to be a timber harvest area, and they essentially flagged, I don't know, a dozen or more trees that they wanted to use. So I just think that's sort of helpful for people to hear, you know, these aren't necessarily trees that are coming out from the surrounding woods, or, you know, that would otherwise just be standing trees. Typically they try to get these things from areas that, you know, basically they buy them rather than having them cut down. They have them pulled out like this for this purpose. So.
Yeah, and I will note that there are some trees on site at this location that are either have fallen in or are at risk of falling into the stream, and those will be the ones that we use first for this process.
Great.
They need to be removed anyway to help stabilize the bank, otherwise they're just going to pull the whole bank. It's kind of counterintuitive to the work that we do a lot of times. But if they go, they're going to pull a lot more of the bank out with them. So if we can take them out in a controlled way and then reinsert them into the stream bank, that will help. So we're hoping to get a number of our root wads from right within the site itself, but we will probably have to purchase some from a timber harvest as well. All right, we can go to the next slide. The next structure that will be placed in the stream is called a rock vein. So this is essentially a structure that is a stone structure. It's lower in the center of the channel, higher up on the sides, or closer to the stream bank. It helps protect the stream banks from erosion and helps focus the stream's energy towards the middle of the channel rather than eroding the stream banks. And you can see in this picture the stream is flowing towards the bottom of the picture, and the rock vein itself is curved in toward the stream flow. On the downstream side of that structure, a scour pool will form, which is really good habitat for trout. And actually, a couple summers ago, they did electrofishing in Phillips Brook in this location and did find brook trout there. So we know that that fish can live in the stream, and by doing this work, we can make it more conducive for fish to live in the stream. Maine Water Quality Statute says that our state waterways need to be drinkable, fishable, and navigable. And so the restoration work that we're doing here will help achieve those things. And so providing habitat for fish is really important. So the rock vein is one structure that will do that. And then the other one is a J-hook. So there you can see there are a few J-hooks on the screen. I think I can see 3 of them in that the plan. A J-hook is similar to a rock vein. Again, a stone structure. It differs from a rock vein in that it doesn't cross the entire stream channel. It only goes in towards the middle of the channel. And again, it directs the stream flow or the energy of the water towards the center of the stream. And similar to the rock vein, it will create a scour pool that helps with more habitat. So we're creating habitat for fish and other species, and also protecting our stream banks. And I mentioned that these structures or these techniques are innovative. In the past, we probably would have stabilized our stream banks just by putting a whole lot of riprap along it. And that really is not what any natural stream looks like. It's not good for stream water quality or stream morphology or the shape of the stream and how it functions, and it actually creates more problems downstream. So there's been a lot of research into stream restoration, and these techniques have become more proven and more well known and more used. And so it's exciting that we'll have a good site in Scarborough where we're showcasing these techniques, and we're really confident that that we'll see improved quality at this location. There's a whole lot more work that would need to happen in Phillips Brook, but this is an important first step in the restoration of the stream. And as Angela mentioned, we are required through our MS4 permit to address some of the issues that have been identified in our urban impaired streams, or the streams that have been impacted by urban development. Phillips Brook is one of those. So it's exciting that the town has been able to secure grant funds to begin doing some of the work necessary in this watershed. All right, next slide, we'll talk a little bit about our timeline. So it was our goal when we got this grant to have it wrapped up by December 2020, and we were on a really good pace to make that happen. We have all of our state and federal permits. We needed to get permits from DEP and from the Army Corps of Engineers. We got those all set. We're in the process of writing our RFP so that we could select a contractor to do the in-stream work, and COVID-19 hit. So we are now looking at pushing this out for a year. Next spring, our Public Works will be doing the site prep work that they had planned to do this spring. And then the in-stream and floodplain restoration will happen over the summer. I should mention that because we do have key fish species in the stream and other species throughout the watershed and at this location, our windows for doing our site work are very small. So we are already kind of up against it, and timing was going to be really tight this summer to get it done, but we were confident that we could make it happen. But that all went out the window at the beginning of March. So we're hoping next spring we'll jump right back in and be able to get this site completed, and the project will wrap up December 2021 now. We'll go to and that's about all that I have on our overview of Phillips Brook, and we can take a few questions if anyone has them.
Yeah, Jamie, I have one. That was great. Thank you. Is there any monitoring that's going to be done during, or more specifically after, completion of the project to look at restoration of habitat in terms of, those bug species you talked about, in terms of trout counts and things like that?
Yeah, so we cannot, DEP can't give us any funding to do any of the monitoring. So we could do our own monitoring if we came up with the funding to do it. DEP is on a 5-year cycle for their stream monitoring. And I think that Phillips Brook is coming up fairly soon, because they did it just prior. Angela, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but just prior to us starting the management plan, or maybe during the management planning process. So that started in 2016. So will be coming up close to their monitoring cycle back in Phillips Brook again this year or next. We can expect a lag period between when the work happens and then when we might see some of the indicator species back. So, and again, this is just one site of many that the watershed management plan identifies. So it's it's likely to be a long process before we see any measured improvement, I would say, in the water quality.
And I'll just add, with that water quality testing that DEP did, a lot of the results of that were showing that while we are an impaired watershed, Phillips Brook is one of those ones that is really teetering on the edge, like looking at how close we are to meeting the criteria that DEP is looking for. It really looked like putting effort into this watershed would really make a difference, because we aren't, like, it's not far gone. We're really at a place where if we pay attention and look at how we develop this watershed, I think we can bring that back. And I think that's what DEP saw as well. And that's where we got funding to do our watershed management plan, as well as this implementation grant. So I think it's a good effort, and I think we can see results. And so, like, to your point, Pete, is really looking at some numbers to put to that.
Thanks.
Anything else? All right. So the last thing was to talk about our next meeting date, which at this point is to be determined, given the current state that we're all in. As much as we love Zooming.
Zooming too much.
Yeah. Exactly.
It's tiring.
It is. Yeah, for sure. So
I guess we can take that conversation offline and not necessarily have to discuss it now, but certainly not in May, not the second week of May, considering May starts in a couple of weeks, in a week.
Right.
So maybe we can consider June or July or something like that. We can take that conversation offline.
So Pete, one thing I will mention is, and I'm not sure if folks saw the news that came out today, but when Town Hall does open back up, we're going to be open 3 days a week, and much of our staff is actually going to be working at reduced hours for the next 3 months. And so we're really going to have to prioritize what we're able to work on over the next 3 months. And so we're certainly, committee work is important. We recognize that. We want to support that, but we also need to take a look at really what the front burner items are. And so, as you said, maybe we can talk offline about when it is and what it is the commission's working on, and when it might be appropriate to reconstitute the committee commission, at least with the staffing that you're typically used to. It may be a few months till we're able to provide that same level. But again, if there's something that's pressing, those are the type of things we need to work on the next few months. So
no, that's great, Jay. Thank you. That's good perspective. I was unaware of that. So
it's very new news. So
yeah, okay.
So Jay, when did Town Hall close? I always thought it was open.
Nope. Geez, when did Town Hall close? That's a great question. I've been at home for the last 2 weeks myself. I think I was there for at least a week when there weren't folks around. So
let's say beginning of April.
Really?
Yeah, it's been 4 months, 4 weeks, right? Feels like 4 months. Maybe it feels like 4 years.
Okay.
Every day feels like a week.
I need to get back.
It's been a little while for sure.
Somebody's getting stir crazy.
So, and as of right now, if you go to the town's website, it talks about Town Hall reopening on May 4th. I think administration's still looking at that based on what I think the governor's going to lay out some new plans tomorrow, is what she had said in her speech today. So I think Tom Hall and administration's really going to take the lead from the governor's, my understanding of it. So before you come to Town Hall to do any business, be sure to check the website or give us a call, because we'll be there soon. Just don't know when soon means.
No, that's great. And very much appreciate you guys sharing those wonderful presentations. I learned a lot today about, now I have to go explore Phillips Brook for some of those native brook trout you're talking about. And trying to catch trout in Scarborough. It's been interesting.
Supposedly they're there.
Oh, I've caught some in Stewart
And they're
Brook.
big, really big.
Yeah, they're huge.
Anyway. Okay, so next meeting we'll take offline. Anything else? We're already half an hour late. I apologize for that, but
That's right. Y'all were asking good questions.
yeah, I
Move to
appreciate
adjourn.
everybody. Yeah, thanks, Susan. Second on that.
Do we need a
second
roll
for
call
me.
vote for that,
I
or
think
can
we need
we
a
just?
roll call. Jay, do we need a roll call?
I'm on mute. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
All right. I think that's good.
You all. Great to see you all. Stay safe.
Second on that, and I assume everybody is going to do that if they don't want to pipe in. Everybody stay healthy, stay safe, and staff, thank you for everything you guys do, and thanks for everybody else that joined tonight.
See you
Thank you
later,
all.
guys.
Be safe.
Thank you.
Take care.